Welcome to another session of our Afri Property Intelligence podcast, and of course, where we give insights as to all you need to know about property acquisition, and land verification. And just today, we're going to be addressing something very, very important, very, very important. And before then, I want to say this to us, like I always say, that in acquiring property, in acquiring real estate, one thing we know is that we always push for verifying before you trust, verifying before you acquire that property you want to acquire, ensuring that every documentation that's involved with that particular verification is in check, right? It's important that this happens. And very recently, we had a particular case that's just played out, where we are verifying a property that belongs to a community, and this property was going to be sold by the community, in this case, to a particular real estate developer, right? In this case, our client. And long and short was that for this to happen, the king, who is the traditional ruler, needs to give consent, needs to be involved in every documentation concerning that transaction. And the fact is, this is Africa, this is Nigeria, and we can't take away the place of our culture, the place of our traditional rulers, our customary rulers, right, when it comes to land. And you know, one beautiful thing is that when you buy a land today, you're not going to carry the land. You won't go home with the land. The land remains where it is. So if you buy a land, let's say for example, in Oka, the land still remains in Oka. You're not going to go home with the land. It still remains there. And that's why an acquisition like that was going to be carried out within a community, it was important that the traditional rulers, right, gave their consent, their verdict to such acquisition. As a matter of fact, it was a community-owned property. And I know that in some cases, we have times where people get to acquire properties without the consent of traditional rulers like this. I mean, properties owned by communities or even villages, right? And while there are glitches here and there, sometimes there could be some communities have their land committee chairman who give verdicts as to acquisition a couple of times, right? And we know that there are disparities where different communities, different villages have different culture, different things they observe, right? While giving out their properties to investors who want to invest in it. But then, I'll say this to us because we believe that if you're going to invest in property, verification should be done properly, right? All checks must be properly carried out. We believe that if we're going to invest in a property, it's not about now, it's about the future, it's about what happens later, right? You wouldn't want to invest in a property and then you can't sleep peacefully. And then there's no need investing in that property in the first place. So now this is it. The first thing that I want you to know is that if you're going to invest in a property within a community, right, a property owned by a community, a property owned by a village, the consent of the traditional ruler is very important. It's very important. I'll give a case study. For example, in Anambra State, something happened, and you can just read it up, right? Where a particular supposed traditional ruler confide a title on a very popular person. We all know her, Bianca Ojukwu. She was given a chieftaincy title, right? And then the state government of Anambra State officially came out to annul that chieftaincy on the grounds that the traditional ruler is not recognized by the Traditional Rulers Council of Anambra State. And on that ground, the chieftaincy title was disannulled. And we also had another scenario where a particular community in Anambra State had rivals, where there were two traditional rulers, right? Two persons coming in as the king. And the state governor himself, Professor Charles Soludo Chukwuma, came into this scenario and organized the committee, right? And after all checks and done, one person was nominated as the original traditional ruler of that particular community, right? Now imagine a case where you want to buy a property in this particular community, and then you have consent from the traditional ruler who is no longer recognized by the state governments. It just means that there's something you are doing wrong, right? No, we're saying this because, and of course, this is to address the place of looking at the traditional rulers, right, when it comes to acquiring property, because there are cases right now. Seriously, the truth is that I really admire and give kudos to property developers. They take a lot of risk, and some of us do not know this, but they really go through a lot to take a lot of risk, right? And some of them lose a lot of money, right? A lot of money that they've taken time and years and days to actually come up with. So this is what I'm saying. From the case of Bianco Ojukwu, it just showed us that the state government in itself, right, has certain rights over what happens within the traditional body. And land acquisition is not any different. It's not any different. If you look at a state like Anambra State, for example, the governor himself, they even had to give certificates appointing traditional rulers within the states, right? And now, imagine again that you have to acquire a property, like a community property, and then you do not take note of that. It means that, because we believe that if I'm going to buy a property from a community, documentation must be properly taken note of, right? There must be proper documentation. There must be proper documentation that must also be recognized by the Ministry of Land, by the state government, right? So it's important that whoever it is that you are dealing with, that I am dealing with as a traditional ruler, must also be such that it's recognized by the state government. Someone asked me and said, what's the business of the state government in who is giving a chieftaincy title? And I was able to make him see that according to the state government, for example, Anambra State, according to state government, it's clearly stated, right, in the constitution, in the constitution that was amended, that before a chieftaincy title is conferred on anybody by the traditional ruler, number one, the traditional ruler must be such that it's recognized by the state government. Number two is that the state government, they have a council, local government council that must be informed, where this person's character, this person's contribution to the community must be clearly defined and stated before such a title is conferred on this person. Such a chieftaincy title is conferred on this particular person by the traditional ruler of that community. And this just tells you that they are strata, right? They are strata to these things. So if you're going to buy a property that belongs to a community, it's important that the case of the traditional ruler must be clearly identified. It's not something you want to joke with at all. It's not something you want to just bypass at all. Because see, we had to go through this route because we know that things just have to be done properly. And let me tell you something. At a particular time, while we are working with a client, we were going to acquire a property, and the property was owned by the government, right? And we know that in government acquisition, we have the committed acquisition and the non-committed acquisition. The committed acquisition is when a particular parcel is being acquired by the government, and specific public purposes or public projects have been assigned to that particular plot of land. Right now, that's a different ballgame. Now, there are also times where the property is not committed, which means that it has been acquired, but there's no specific project assigned to such land parcel yet. Now, what that means is that the community in itself has the right to write to the state government, right, seeking for an accession, right, seeking for the land to be released to them. Now, they have that right. Now, as a developer or an investor, you do not have the right to write to the state government. It is only the community that does that. And don't forget, who leads the community? Traditional ruler. Now, we're going to come to the case of the President General much later. But in this case, the traditional ruler has to be involved in whatever is going on. The documentation by part of people who are going to be signatories when the letter is being carried out. Traditional rulers are also part of it. Right, so you see how important they are. You see how important it is to carry them within the process of land acquisition within a community, especially when you are buying a community-owned property or a property that is owned by a village. So even the government, even in giving out, even in obtaining a decision from the government also recognizes that, see, the traditional ruler, the community are the ones who write the letter to us, and not even individuals, not even developers. Developers can sponsor that at the background, can tell them one or two things to do at the background, but they can't show their face. So it's important that we understand that, see, these things have there are structures that must be carried out. So you're going to get a property. It's important you just understand how these things work. Understand how these things work. And see, let me tell you this. Even when the state government has to acquire certain properties from communities, from villages, they are very intentional to also carry these people along. They don't just come in. The state government doesn't just come in, acquire property and go. No, it follow due process to ensure that the traditional rulers, the committee chairmen of the land committee and the committee chairmen of these respective communities are also carried out, which means that they also recognize this authority, and this is just for order. So I'm saying to us as investors or developers that if you're going to acquire a property, right, this is something you just have to observe. It's very, very important. It's very, 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 very important. And don't forget that, see, the state government, for example, in Anambra State, they have a committee where the government of the state, along with the traditional rulers and their committee, right, come together to decide certain important to make certain important decisions, including decisions that has to do with lands, right, for the benefit of all. Because of course, the traditional rulers are the ones who know their community better than the state government. Do you understand? So they sit together to make certain decisions as it regards the community or that locality. So it's important that we're able to observe this strata of leadership. So only recognized kings can confer such authority, can stand in such place to validate certain property transactions in communities. It's important that we know this and we know how it works, right? So this is the thing. If you're going to acquire property in a particular location, right? I know for many states in Nigeria, in Lagos, in Ogun State, in Anambra, right, in Imo, in Abia states, in many of these states, right, they have respective committees, right, that gives access to respective traditional ruler in communities. There's a lot of thank God for the governors that we have currently, who have put structures, right? Why this is also ongoing, why this is progressive, why this is developmental, right? They've put in certain structures, right, to point out who is who, right, in different communities. So it's important that you work with such bodies, right? You work with such bodies to know who is who. Who do I work with? Who is in charge in this locality? Who is recognized as the traditional ruler in this locality, such that the land transactions can be validated, can be recognized, or can be properly recognized by the state government. So it's important that we get this right. Don't forget that one thing about land ownership is this: it always recognizes history, right? It always recognizes history. If you're going to sell the property to someone tomorrow, history also has to be taken note of. Even yourself, who is an investor or a developer who is going to invest in that property, you also need to take note of history. And don't forget that this history ought to be documented. And little glitches like this, we call them little sometimes, right? Little glitches like this, little things like this that are not paid attention to, can be the reason why such documentations can be faulted later in the future. And you don't want to have such glitches. You don't want to have such cockroaches in your cupboards that were not properly and well taken care of. So this is one important part of land and property acquisition, right, that must be paid attention to. And of course, I believe it's going to help a whole number of us out there who are looking to invest in such property to do the right thing, to follow the right pattern, to follow and observe protocol, right, such that we don't get to experience land disputes or land scam at the end of the day. The truth is that it's been said that an average land dispute lasts for within 5 to 9 years in the courts. And you don't want to even get into anyone because of your failure to observe certain things, like this. I believe this is going to be a help to a good number of us out there, and of course, it's going to direct us when it comes to carrying out property and property verification. While we carry out property verification, we want to ensure that we have systems and structures in place just like this to help and aid us, right, in accurately verifying every property that has to be invested in.